There are few visual artists who are so distinguished that they themselves transcend their own work. We certainly discussed one of them in our last segment on Andy Warhol, and today we're taking a look at another exalted icon whose enduring popularity not only preceded Warhol's eminence, but rivals it. We're talking about the woman, the myth, the legend that is Frida Kahlo, the self-taught Mexican painter whose fervent practice is rife with emotive snapshots of her profound existence. Welcome back to Several Circles. It's an ideal time to be a Frida maniac in New York City, as the Brooklyn Museum has finally unveiled the largest Frida Kahlo retrospective on U.S. soil in a decade, the first of its kind to also exhibit her personal effects and items of her clothing to an American audience. In light of all this, we're considering why and how exactly this outsider artist became one of the most venerated women in modern history. Frida Kahlo was born Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón in 1907, just outside of Mexico City, to a Mexican mother and a German father. Her mixed-race heritage was of course crucial to her identity as a person, but it also intrinsically guided her body of work. Her intensely introspective nature would eventually prompt an outpour of self-portraits, 55 to be exact, many of which investigated the two ethnic components of her makeup. Now what's interesting is that the artist went by Frida Kahlo, both of which are German names from her father's side, but so much of her aesthetic, from the clothes she wore to the symbolism in her paintings, embraced her mother's indigenous Mexican heritage. Frida's devotion to Mexico was so strong that she would actually say she was born 3 years later in 1910, when the decade-long Mexican Revolution officially began. Kahlo joined the Mexican Communist Party as a teenager, but her eventual partnership with the revered Mexican muralist and vehement Marxist Diego Rivera would add fuel to Kahlo's association with the political sphere. That said, Kahlo certainly acknowledged her European blood throughout her life as well. When the Nazi Party ascended to power in 1930s Germany, she would add an E to her name so that it was spelled F-R-I-E-D-A, referencing the German word Frieden, which means peace. But Kahlo's existence was hardly defined by peace. Childhood polio rendered her right leg thinner than her left, and historians also postulate that she may have had spina bifida, which would have further hindered the development of her leg as well as her spine. As the Mexican Revolution raged at its midpoint in 1925, an 18-year-old Frida Kahlo then fatefully boarded a bus that collided violently with a trolley car and left her with a broken pelvis, collarbone, and spinal column, a crushed right leg with 11 fractures and a dislocated foot, and an iron bar impaling her abdomen. Kahlo would suffer terribly in the aftermath of the accident and for the duration of her life, and undergo some 30 operations in its wake. But the time she spent recovering in a body cast would engender one of the most revelatory painting practices the world has ever seen. Kahlo was completely confined to her bed for about 3 months, and it was during this time that she began experimenting with self-portraiture. "I paint myself because I am so often alone, and I am the subject I know best," she said. Her mother crafted an easel that she could use from her bed, and her father, who was a professional photographer and an amateur painter himself, kept her supplied with brushes and paints. Kahlo completed her first self-portrait, entitled Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, in 1926. The painting is a notably elegant rendering of the artist wearing a burgundy robe amid a dark and stormy background. Kahlo's second self-portrait, Time Flies, portrays the artist in a traditional white Mexican frock with short lace-trimmed sleeves. A small clock looms next to her left ear, while green curtains, parted by red rope, reveal a warplane flying outside the window. Kahlo painted Time Flies the same year that she married Diego Rivera. The two met in 1925 when she consulted the famed muralist for advice on becoming an artist. She was 18 and he was 37, but they fell in love and they married in 1929. The color palette featured in Time Flies signals the red, green, and white colors of the Mexican flag and highlights the artist's Mexican identity, the side of her that Rivera always said he loved most. In turn, pre-Columbian artifacts and distinctively Mexican modes of dress in Kahlo's self-portraits are apparent in a number of her paintings, including Self-Portrait with Monkey and The Four Inhabitants of Mexico City, both from 1938, as well as Self-Portrait as a Tijuana from 1943, and Self-Portrait with Small Monkeys from 1945. The monkey, a favored motif throughout Kahlo's career, is a Mexican symbol for lust, though Kahlo would portray them almost as if they were her children. The iron rod that punctured Kahlo's abdomen on the bus also pierced her uterus, rendering her unable to have the children she so desperately wanted. In 1932, Kahlo accompanied Rivera to Detroit, where he was commissioned to create the masterful Detroit Industry murals, which are still on view at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Kahlo suffered a devastating miscarriage while they were in the US, which inspired her painting entitled Henry Ford Hospital, in which she bleeds helplessly on the bed, surrounded by 6 symbols attached to umbilical cord-like ribbons, among them her unborn child, a snail, which likely references the slowing of time during this pivotal event, and a wilted flower, perhaps for the perceived failure of her femaleness. Kahlo would lose 3 pregnancies in her lifetime. Shortly after her 3rd pregnancy was terminated, Rivera had an affair with Kahlo's younger sister, Cristina. The discovery yielded a few small nips from 1935, in which a nude woman lies cut up in bed with a blood-stained man wielding a knife over her body. The subject and title referenced the actual case of a man who stabbed his wife to death after discovering that she was having an affair. He reasoned to the judge, "But all I did was give her a few small nips." However, the murdered woman wears a brace on her right foot, which indicates Kahlo's placement of herself in the painting as the victim of what felt like mortal heartbreak. Kahlo and Rivera had a notoriously turbulent relationship marked by fiery tempers and innumerable affairs by both parties. Kahlo had extramarital relationships with both men and women, including the Japanese-American artist and designer Isamu Noguchi, the Russian Marxist revolutionary Leon Trotsky, and the American-born Parisian entertainer and French resistance spy Josephine Baker. Rivera and Kahlo would divorce in 1939 and remarry a year later, but nothing would change the second time around. Their relationship was one of intense passion and pain for Kahlo, who consistently illustrated her emotional distress through dreamlike imagery on the canvas. For this reason, Kahlo is often and understandably classified as a surrealist, but she denied her association with the 20th century European group, which most famously included the Spanish multidisciplinary artist Salvador Dali, Belgian painter René Magritte, and German artist Max Ernst. Kahlo's work was noticed by the author of the Surrealist Manifesto, André Breton, who in 1939 invited Kahlo to exhibit her work in Paris. The Louvre would subsequently purchase one of the artist's most vibrant and characteristically Mexican self-portraits, entitled The Frame, making it the first artwork by a modern Mexican artist ever acquired by a major European institution. However, Kahlo said, quote, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Shortly after Kahlo and Rivera divorced, she painted one of her most iconic images, the two Fridas. The double self-portrait depicts the two halves of the artist's identity. On the left, the German Frida wears a distinctively European dress, while the Mexican Frida is outfitted in a traditional Tijuana tunic. Both Fridas bear their hearts, but the German Frida has cut hers wide open and bleeds freely on her white dress. This is the Frida that Rivera has rejected. Kahlo was also known to cut her hair in times of distress. In 1940, she created Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair, in which she's pictured seated clutching a pair of scissors, wearing a stoic expression and a suit, surrounded by scattered locks of her beloved hair. Above her head, the lyrics to a song read, "See, if I loved you, it was for your hair. Now you're bald, I don't love you anymore." Kahlo and Rivera remarried in 1940, and their time together was marked by creative bursts, political campaigning for the working class, and Kahlo's declining health due to lasting complications from her accident in 1925. In 1943, Kahlo painted the self-explanatory Thinking About Death, followed by the Broken Column in 1944, shortly after undergoing surgery on her spine. Standing amid a cracked landscape, a fragile Frida is propped up by a corset and a crumbling post down her back, haphazardly held together with nails, which likely nods to the crucifixion. Much of Kahlo's work references Catholic iconography, as well as the style and format of Mexican ex-voto paintings, images made to express gratitude to a saint for performing some sort of miracle. But Kahlo may have also employed Catholic imagery in a plea for relief from her relentless suffering. By 1945, Kahlo was in a significantly weakened state to the point where she had to be force-fed. Without Hope depicts a giant easel straddling Kahlo's bed with her in it, but instead of a canvas, the easel props up a large funnel containing a skull, dead animals that comprise her forced diet, and other biological matter that spills out over the edges. After 1945, Kahlo's artistic output declined. She didn't paint anything in 1950, when several failed surgeries kept her in the hospital for almost an entire year, barely present from high doses of painkillers. She would become confined to a wheelchair, and in 1953, half of her right leg was amputated. Kahlo lived to see her first Mexican retrospective at the Mexico City Gallery of Contemporary Art that same year, which she attended via ambulance and traversed from her famous four-poster bed. Kahlo died at the age of 47 in 1954. Just days before her death, on July 13th, she recorded in her diary, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her final painting is a still life of ripe red watermelons, poetically titled Viva la Vida. Frida Kahlo created 143 paintings in her lifetime. Her art is an unflinching exploration of physical and emotional trauma, which broke the mold for more women to embrace their perspectives of the human condition. Kahlo's work is not only exquisite to behold, but it's one of the most most exposing painting practices that exists to this day, among the ranks of tortured male artists like Vincent van Gogh and Edvard Munch. It's a raw glimpse into a harrowing life cut short, and a sincere investigation into the spheres of womanhood, ethnicity, and disability. Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, is now on view at the Brooklyn Museum until May 12, 2019. Alongside a selection of the artist's work, the exhibition considers Kahlo's unparalleled legacy as a cultural figure and as a perennial brand through the lens of her clothing, personal possessions, including the collection of pre-Columbian artifacts that she and Rivera had lovingly amassed, and hand-painted corsets that she wore during her recoveries, and archival materials, including film clips and photographs that illuminate Kahlo's life in its multifaceted entirety. Thanks so much for watching Several Circles. Please subscribe below for the many videos to come about the lives of historic, modern, and contemporary artists with current and upcoming exhibitions in New York City.